Hello, fellow Democrats. Welcome to today's presentation of Discussion for Democracy, presented by the Pima County Democratic Party. These forums will give Democrats running for statewide and federal office the chance to answer questions based on issues that matter most to their constituents here in Pima County.
And we're so lucky today. We've got Reginald and Adrian Fontes, both trying to save democracy by getting elected to the Secretary of State.
For those of you who haven't come to a DGT meeting, my name is Larry Bodine, and I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson.
Also a precinct committee man in LD 18. Let me introduce both of you. Reginald Bolden, first elected as a state representative in LD 27 up in the Phoenix area. And now he's serving his fourth term in the legislature. He's the Democratic leader of the Arizona House of Representatives, and he's the founder of the largest Black-led voting rights and community engagement organizations in the state. He's the executive director and founder of Our Voice, Our Vote, Arizona, and also the Arizona Coalition for Change. These organizations have registered more than 50,000 people to vote, providing opportunities for young people to engage in politics. So welcome, Reginald. And we also have Adrian Fontes, who is the first Latino countywide elected official in Maricopa County. He was the Maricopa County recorder from 2017 to 2021, when all of the 2020 brouhaha started. Even amid the COVID pandemic and insurrections at the Maricopa County recorder's office and the nation's capital, he set up an elections infrastructure that has led to record voter turnout. In a nutshell, what he did is he improved the mail-in voting system. He implemented a text message ballot tracking, also installed 24/7 internet cameras on the ballot tabulation center, and vastly increased in-person voting despite the COVID protocols. And with that, I'll turn to you first, Reginald. Would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So my last name is Bolding. So with B, I've been going first for years. It's cool. So that's fine. I'm used to it now. Good afternoon. Good seeing you all. My name is Reginald Bolding. Like many of you know, partisanship is at an all-time high right now. Our elections are more partisan than they've ever been. It's no longer about an exchange of ideas of how you can make Arizona better. It's about how can I ensure that my team wins at all costs, even if you tear down the system while doing that. And what we know is that if we want to change the dynamics of our state, if we want to change the dynamics of that conversation, it begins with electing leaders who are going to lead. Look, in order to win this race, we're going to have to make sure that we have a leader that brings three things: leadership, experience, and vision. And I can tell you, my time in the state legislature, I've been doing just that. But before I tell you about what I do, I'm going to tell you about who I am. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, and like more than 50% of Arizonans, I choose to call Arizona home. I was born by a single mom who had no more than a high school education, but her single most important issue in life was to make sure that her three young boys had a better opportunity than she did. She believed that one generation should do better for the next. And that really provided a lot of hope for myself and my younger brothers. We grew up in poverty. And now from growing up in poverty to now serving as the House Democratic leader, the system, democracy helped make that happen. You know, I spent time here in Arizona in a classroom. I was a classroom teacher. Over 15 years ago, I decided to turn down a full ride law school scholarship to one of the top schools in this country to become a teacher. And I look forward to telling you a little bit more about myself and my story as we go throughout the rest of today. Thank you.
Adrian, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And my name is Adrian Fontes. I'm running for Arizona's Secretary of State. And I'm very happy that the young Democrats here at the U of A who hosted me here before are now hosting this forum. I grew up in Nogales, and Tucson has a special place in my heart. In fact, in 1977, right across the street from Elcon Mall, I was there the day Star Wars opened. I was at Fred Snowden's last basketball camp on this campus and Lute Olson's first two basketball camps as a junior high and high school student here. And I got the privilege to sing on stage with Linda Ronstadt at the International Mariachi Conference at the Tucson Convention Center. And so Tucson's really an important place for me, and Pima County professionally is incredibly important to me because after my term as Maricopa County Recorder, I was your chief deputy recorder under Gabriela Cáceres Kelly for her first transition 100 days in office. And so you've got vote centers here in Pima County now because of the information and the wherewithal that we brought down with us from Phoenix. You're going to have that ballot tracking system here soon because every voter should get a text message or an email if they want when their ballot gets mailed to them and when it gets returned to the election department. This is the kind of experience that is important. And by the way, experience and electability are the two single most important issues when it comes to this office. Why? Because as Mr. Boulding said, our democracy is under threat. It's under attack by neo-authoritarians and fascists. They want to take your vote away, and for more than half of you, you already know they want to take your rights away. Bottom line is you've got to have someone with the experience and statewide electability. Now, I don't only enjoy memories here, but I enjoy the endorsement of Congressman Raul Grijalva, who is very important for the environment and a lot of folks' rights around here. Critically, though, we have to communicate with voters, and that's where electability comes in. Y soy el único candidato aquí corriendo para el secretario del Estado de Arizona que va a poder comunicar con todos nuestros votantes en un idioma que entienden, que pueden tener confianza en. And this is critical because we got to protect our democracy with candidates who can win. If we can't win, we can't govern. We've got to win in November. I'm Adrian Fontes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, let me ask you both the same question about democracy being under attack. From what I can see, there are all sorts of dangers coming up in the 2022 election. What do you think we're facing, and how do you plan to deal with it?
Look, what we saw is when Republicans tried to make it harder to vote, when they launched the fraud it. This is not something that we've just seen in 2020, 2021. We've seen this for the last several years. You know, and I've been on the front lines at the state legislature over the last 8 years fighting for our rights. Here in Arizona and across the country, over 900 voter restriction bills have been introduced. Just this year, with 100 of them coming from our state legislature. You know, under my leadership, we've been successful fighting back against those voter restriction bills. And that's what we'll continue to do as the next Secretary of State. Look, the reality is here in the state of Arizona, you have to have someone who understands not only the policy, but also has the ability to get things done. Look, I serve on the House Government and Elections Committee. I've been the ranking member of our Education Committee, and literally out of the last 8 years, 4 of those leading Democrats at the state legislature. Right now, we have the largest Democratic caucus since 1966. That's because we've been standing up and protecting and fighting for our right to vote. And we'll continue to do that.
Adrian, same question to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think there are two grave dangers that we face in 2022. The first is a continuation of politics as usual, allowing misinformation and disinformation to drive the conversation. We fought against that hard in Maricopa County when I was the reporter there, and we established some protocols here in Pima County to make sure that we advance against those protocols. But as Democrats, one of the greatest dangers that we face is a lack of motivation. Why? Because we don't have candidates for every office. Here in our House, our leader has made sure that we cannot take the majority. We do not have enough candidates running for the House of Representatives to even mathematically possibly take the majority, and that falls under Mr. Boulding's leadership. We as Democrats have to fight hard at every level. We have to run folks at the school board level. We have to run folks at this county level. We have to run folks in every single legislative district to make sure that our voters are not disenfranchised and disheartened and unmotivated. That's what that lack of leadership gives us. And so we're facing dangers from all sides of the political aisle here, Democrats. The most critical one, of course, is the danger that we're slipping slowly into authoritarianism, that we cannot ignore. We've got to fight against that with vigor. Thank you.
Quick, Larry, I do want to respond back because I think it's important for us to be crystal clear. You know, politicians attack people. Leaders attack problems. And when we have candidate forums and we're talking to Democrats about what we can do to improve our elections, what we can do to fight for Arizonans, it's going to be important to have a leader that's going to be able to talk about their vision, their experience, and their leadership. And as the next Secretary of State, I'll do that just as I'll do as a candidate.
Well, I obviously it's about leadership. And when you can't field a team that can even win mathematically, you're not leading. And we have to call it like it is, folks. Democrats too long are comfortable taking second place in this state, and that will not happen when I'm your candidate in November. We will fight tooth and nail across the entire state like I have done. And it's not just about people. It's about actually strategizing statewide, like we did yesterday in Flagstaff and Kingman, like we've done in Quartzsite and Winslow and Heber Overgard and Safford. This is a statewide race. We have to fight like heck, Democrats. We have to.
It's always about people. That's a difference. All
right. Let me ask a different question, and that is, I'll start with you, Adrian. What can the Secretary of State do to improve voter trust in the elections?
Well, the things that we did in Maricopa County, and I already have experience actually doing. The ballot tracking system is one of the most critical systems, and it's promoted by Republicans and Democrats. Think about this. You sign up to get a text message or an email. When you're eligible for an election, you get a text message or an email. When your ballot is being printed, when it gets mailed to you, these are bits of information that come to you so you know the system is working for you. This is easily generated. It didn't cost us hardly anything in Maricopa County. It won't cost anything for the other counties because we're already generating that information for every single ballot. We can do that and let people know when their ballot's coming to them and when it gets back. Hugely improves trust. And we've got a lot of Republicans who like that as well. Democrats can too. We can be much more transparent in the way that we act and interact. Look, we in Maricopa County, when I was the county recorder, opened up the doors. We had legislators from all of the different parties. Everybody was coming in, taking tours. We put those 24/7 cameras into the ballot tabulation center. We made sure that it was as open and transparent as possible. And that's why Karen Fann and the Cyber Ninjas could not get at us. We published solid policies ahead of time, and it was the most highly scrutinized election in American history, the one that I ran. And nothing wrong was found with it, except, we got more questions and more. Well, they're going to have questions forever because they don't have a real attack. We've already been there. We've already done that. I have the experience to make sure that counties across the state get the support they need, and then we will be able to build that trust and support from voters. We've got to start with that experience.
All right, and same question for you. If you're elected to the Secretary of State's office, what will you do to improve voter trust in the election?
That's extremely important. When voters go to the ballot in November, particularly independent voters and those Republican voters who lean Democrat, they're going to be looking at someone that they can actually trust to run the election system. As I mentioned, partisanship, we have to make sure that we're providing a system in play that's going to make sure no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or independent, that you know that we have free, fair, and secure elections. And in order for that to happen, they're going to have a leader that they trust running the Secretary of State's office. Look, over the last 8 years, I've passed more bills in a Republican-controlled legislature than any other Democrat over the last 8 years. You only do that by building coalitions. That's the reason why Tucson and Pima County leaders all support me, such as Regina Romero, our mayor, Lane Santa Cruz, Andros Cano. We have so many more, Alma Hernandez, Rex Scott. We have all of these leaders who are with us and they're supporting our campaign. Former Congressman Ron Barber, because they know in order for you to win, you have to be able to build a coalition. Look, I've ran 8 elections, primary and generals over the last 8 years. I've won every single one of them, primary and general, every single one of them I won because I was able to bring people together. The language I speak is working class people who want to get things done. And that's what I'll continue to do as the next Secretary of State.
I think we have to have a correction here. Sean Bowie is the Democrat at the legislature who has passed more legislation than any other Democrat in the last several years. So I think that's important. The second important thing is the Secretary of State doesn't run elections. Counties run elections. The Secretary regulates elections and helps counties in supporting them. You've got to have the experience of knowing what the job is actually about if you actually want to get the job done. And I would argue that the 4-1 Republican Board of Supervisors in Maricopa, who've been extolling the virtues of the system I built, and even the county recorder who replaced me, who's extolling the virtues of the system that I built, are a very strong endorsement of the work that I've done advancing the interest of Arizona's voters.
And that's important because you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I have the experience of being the county recorder and running elections, and then say, as Secretary of State, you don't run elections. Look, you either have the experience or you don't. The reality is, the last 5 Secretary of States all came from the legislature. Because what Mr. Fontes failed to mention is that the Secretary of State is also the Lieutenant Governor here in Arizona. You have to have someone who understands the state. So for me, I've been in rooms negotiating water policy, wildfires, the opioid epidemic, tribal gaming policies. These are things that I do currently as the Democratic leader. Sit across the hall from the Speaker of the House, the Governor, and the Senate President as leader, and that's what you need as the next Secretary of State.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn to you to ask questions. So start thinking about a good one right now. Let's talk a little bit about getting to the ballot box. One of the wonderful things about Pima County is now we have voting centers, so it doesn't matter what precinct you vote in. Let's talk about accessibility in rural areas and tribal lands. What would you do as Secretary of State to make voting more accessible there?
You know, this is an extremely important question. And this is also the reason why tribal leaders all endorse me and they're supporting me in this race, is because they know that in order for you to make sure that you're going to provide accessibility in tribal communities, you have to understand the policy. So vote centers, they came out of policy from the state legislature. Ballot tracking came out of policy from the state legislature. So for me, it should be as easy as it is when you go to Amazon. If it's easier for you to know when your package is going to come in the mail, you should know when your ballot. So what we'll do is we'll create a One Arizona policy where we'll work with all 15 county recorders to make sure that you know when your ballot has been sent, when it's been received, when you send it back, and when it's been tabulated. We'll ensure that that happens. And you have to be able to bring people to the table to make that happen. And that's what we'll do. And right now, what we're seeing with our tribal nations, we have seen a direct attack on our tribal communities because they're turning out and they're voting. In fact, I'm currently filed a federal lawsuit in federal court fighting against a bill that would make it more difficult for our tribal communities. In fact, I have a history of going to court to fight and stand up for voters. In 2020, I took the state to federal court to extend the voter registration deadline. And during that time, we won. And in 10 days, 35,000 Arizonans were able to vote in the 2020 election because I took them to court and because I won. And that's leadership. We need people who are going to fight in real time for our communities, like I've done for the tribal communities, like I've done for my district, and like I've done throughout the state as a state legislator.
Adrian, what would you do to make voting more accessible in rural and tribal lands?
Well, look, let's just correct something first. Ballot tracking in Arizona came from the Denver Election Department because I personally brought it. It didn't have anything to do with the Arizona State Legislature.
You got to look at statutes.
You got to look at who actually did the job. And I did that job. And I'm not going to let anybody else take credit away from my programmers, my staff in Maricopa County, and that bipartisan team that did the work. Moreover, vote centers came out of the Elections Procedures Manual, which is not a legislative act. That comes from the Secretary and the Attorney General. And Yavapai County's been doing it since 2012. That did not come out of the legislature. And so what we have to do is give credit where credit is due. Leslie Hoffman, the Republican county recorder in Yavapai County, brought vote centers into Prescott Valley, and the parts of Sedona that are under her jurisdiction. It didn't come out of the legislature. So here's the deal, folks. The reason that Republicans like working with me is because I'm not going to hide the truth. And I'm not going to misinform or disinform. And they're going to get the straight scoop from me, the straight data from me. They're going to get the information they need to make informed decisions. And when they do, they cut big checks to benefit our voters, including more access on reservations, including making sure that our data systems are secure enough, making sure that the fundamental architecture of those systems can support rural communities. These are the things that we already worked on when I was the Maricopa County recorder. We didn't sit and make big policy decisions and horse trade with the other side and get shut out of negotiations. I did the job. My team did the job, and I'm ready to do it again for all of Arizona's voters.
And one thing, Larry, that's extremely important. And I respect the work that you've done as the county recorder, Mr. Fontes. And you were county recorder during two elections, 2018 and 2020. If you notice, Mr. Fontes never talks about the 2018 election. Why? Under his leadership, we didn't have one voting machine, not two, not three, but 62 voting machines weren't able on day one for people to actually cast their vote. Hundreds of voters were disenfranchised under your leadership as Maricopa County. And then when a constituent told you why were they disenfranchised, you told them to go F off. Look, That's not the type of leadership that Arizonans want. We have to make sure that Democrats have someone that they can fight for and believe in. And you can be good and well sure that Republicans, they're going to use that against you if you were the nominee. And that's why we have to make sure that we have someone that has experience, who's been working together, and who has the experience to make sure that we can bring coalitions.
Well, I have to answer that because it's just flat wrong.
We all have
the problem that we had in 2018. Well, this is a personal attack here because the problem that we had in 2018 wasn't during the general. It was during the primary.
That makes sense.
Maricopa County runs 5 elections in presidential cycles, and in non-presidential cycles, we run 4 elections every single year because we have special districts. Arizona has election days in March, in May, in August, and in November, every single year. You should know that if you're going to be running for Arizona Secretary of State. And moreover, the incident where I asked someone to go do something to themselves that was unkind had nothing to do with that election. Check the record, Mr. Bolding. That was in the fall of 2017, and it was to a Democrat running for office who was insulting my staff. I will not let my voters or my staff be misrepresented against. I will not allow Democrats to have their votes hidden away. I will not allow any Arizona's voters to be disenfranchised if I can keep it from happening. And I will not apologize for my passion, because my passion is about free and fair elections and telling the truth. At least there's one of us in this primary that believes in that.
All right, I'm going to end it right there. Let's take a question from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Are you prepared for the death threats, threats of violence, the viterative accusations that Katie Hobbs has endured since the 2020 election?
Look, absolutely.
Well, I think she was looking at me. In 2018, in 2018, one of my children brought an anonymous package from my porch into the kitchen counter. And when my then wife called me up and said, "Were you expecting a package?" I asked her what the return address was. There wasn't one. I told her to leave the house and take the kids. And they evacuated houses all the way around. This was in 2018. The bomb squad came and cleared the package. Since then, I've had staff physically accosted. I've had several death threats against myself and my staff. I even had one of my staff members pulled out of the lobby at the election center in Maricopa County who had to be physically pulled back away from the crowd. We've already dealt with this. I've already dealt with it. My children had go bags packed up so they could leave the house at a moment's notice. In fact, my then wife actually moved them out of the house for several days. Am I prepared? You're darn right I'm prepared. This old Marine just wants to report for duty in another uniform. I'm ready. I've been there. We need the experience, and we need some Democrats who are actually going to fight for us. And that's what you're going to get when I become the candidate.
And absolutely, it's been pretty well chronicled. You have a number of elected officials who faced death threats. And I can recall when I drove to my house with my daughter in the back seat, we pulled up. There was a bright red package that said Representative Bolding on it. I called the number 2 in command at the City of Phoenix Police Department. I said, "Hey, we have this package that was just dropped off," because I saw a gentleman in a pickup truck with a Confederate flag who reached behind inside of in the bed of his truck and set it on my front steps. I called and asked, "What should I do?" He said, "Call 911 immediately." So we called 911. We had the bomb squad there. We had the packets set. We sent in the robots. They put it in the field, evacuated the whole block. That's a common story that's happening with Democrats. That's happening with election officials across the country, and it should not be a reality. The reality is, though, is that we have to make sure that we are changing the tone of our politics. Otherwise, you just keep getting what we've already got. This partisanship, this fighting to ensure that their candidate wins at all costs. And the way that you do that is by rolling up your sleeves, speaking truth to power, and implementing systems that people can believe in, a vision that people understand, and a vision that people can get behind.
All right, let's go with another question. Yes.
We've been hearing a lot about the enthusiasm gap between the Democrats and the Republicans with the 2022 election. In this particular case, we have a January 6th participant as the leading Republican candidate. He's raised over $1 million. Neither of you have raised $250,000 yet. What's your plan to bridge that gap?
Reginald, go ahead.
No, incorrect. We both have raised over $250,000. So
Okay.
with that said, Republicans are rallying around election offices. Look, there is a coordinated effort to put far right Republicans in Secretary of State offices throughout this country. They're going to try to do in 2024 what they weren't able to do in 2020, which is to overturn the election if their candidate does not win. We cannot afford to lose this race. We will not have a second chance. That's why what we're doing is building coalitions. I'm not sure if you saw just this week, one of the largest Latino civic engagement organizations, Lucha, Living Here for United for Change, they just came out to endorse our campaign because they know that we're going to have to go into communities, door by door, voter by voter, to excite and engage people. And I'm glad to have their support and the support of several other organizations in this race. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell the story about what happens if we don't win, because there's a lot at stake. But even more than that, I truly believe people are looking for something to fight for, not fight against. So our campaign is about giving something people to fight for and something to believe in.
Democrats have to field a candidate in this race who's going to punch up. We've got to get Senator Kelly reelected. The importance of the governor's office cannot be understated. And we've got to have a candidate who's willing to go and do the work on the ground around all of Arizona to fire up our voters everywhere in every district and every county. And that's why I've already been to Yuma and Sierra Vista. That's why I've been to Safford, Heber Overgard, and Winslow. Yesterday, I drove to Flagstaff and then to Kingman and all the way back to Phoenix again to put my mom on an airplane. The bottom line is this. When it comes to the excitement gap, we've got to make sure that we can field candidates who have the capacity to bring the fire. We have to be able to excite the folks to close that gap. The nature of your question is spot on, and I'm glad that you asked it. Because when it comes down to it, the spirit of fight is what we lack a little bit in the Democratic Party. We've been a little bit lackluster in that area. Policy's great. Talking to people back and forth and doing all this horse trading is great. But getting the job done, being passionate about supporting your people, your staff, candidates up and down the ballot, that's what gets people excited. That's what's going to bring folks out to help us knock on doors. And I think that's what's critically important when we talk about electability in the fall.
So this is sort of a follow-up to that question. We've got to get a Democrat in this seat. Absolutely. So understanding that there's tried and true methods and knocking on doors and turning out voters, but if each of you are the candidate, how are you going to innovate in your election strategy?
Well, I think what we got to do, particularly as it pertains to young people, is listen to them and ask them how to get their peer group out. You know, I've got 3 teenage daughters. I know Reg's got 3 younger daughters. I don't know what the language is that they speak. I don't understand what it's like to go through active shooter drills or to be looking at a climate crisis or to be shut down out a couple of years of school. I don't know what experiences they have. And so we've got to talk to the youth and listen to them and find out what they want from candidates, what they want from political parties. And one of the reasons why I know that works is because when I was the county recorder, we innovated in that we created a roundtable program. We went to 6 communities that were traditionally underserved. We went to Latino voters, African American voters, Asian American, Pacific Islanders. We went out to our indigenous reservations, and we talked to college and university students as a 5th group, and we talked to voters with disabilities, and we listened, and we asked them, how can we help you vote easier? How can we administer the election better? It's that act of listening, I think, that's the innovation, because politicians just tend to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, but they don't listen. And I think doing that as we move forward through this is going to reap some great rewards for Democrats across the board.
Yeah, I think this is probably the biggest and largest gap between my experience and Mr. Fontes. I founded one of the largest civic engagement organizations. We went from having a staff of 2 to hiring over 200 people. We have offices in the 3 largest counties here in the state of Arizona. And particularly here in Tucson, right at the street on Speedway, where our office is. A civics center study came out in 2001. and it showed that fewer than 15% of 18-year-olds are registered to vote. Fewer than 15%. And when you think about who those voters are, those are our voters. You know, that's why under my leadership as the next Secretary of State, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to partner with the Superintendent of Public Instruction to make sure that every single high school has voter registration forms for students upon graduation so they can get registered to vote. I don't care what party they register for. The fact is that they have to get in the game, because if we want issues like climate, student loan forgiveness, healthcare, if we want those issues to be solved, they have to speak.
All right, we're getting low on time. I'm sorry there's no time for questions. What I would like to do would be to ask each of you to give a summary argument on why you should be elected. Reginald, why don't we begin with you?
First, thank you all for being here. You could have been anywhere on Sunday, but you chose to be here. And when it comes to experience to this office, and no one brings more experience than myself. And that's why I'm extremely excited about that. Whether we're talking about personal experience, growing up, fighting, living in poverty to do whatever we can to make sure that our community and our folks had the ability to fight through whatever they could, to turning down a full ride law school scholarship, to becoming a classroom teacher, those experiences and those values matter. When it comes to professional experience, leading one of the largest civic engagement organizations is important. Serving as the executive director, managing director of one of the largest education nonprofits in our state, and as the House Democratic leader, when you put our experience, compare it to each other, it's not even close. But what is important is that how many of you in here ever applied for a job before, ever in your life? Ever, right? When you apply for a job, they typically ask you for references. And when you look at our references and you look at my opponent's references, it's crystal clear about why people are supporting us. We have the mayors of Flagstaff, Tucson, Tempe, over 50 state legislators and lawmakers and city council folks, tribal nation leaders. They're all supporting us in this race. And the reason you have to ask yourself is why? Because they know that we're going to win in November. They know that we've been a coalition builder, and they know that we're building a campaign to win. Recently, when it comes to doing the work, our campaign, we've been rolling up on our sleeves and we've been doing the work. Right now, we have almost twice as much cash on hand than our opponent. And there's no way he's going to be able to go up against Mark Fincham in his race if he can't raise the money to get his message out. So we're excited about this race because it is about people. It's always been about people. My life's been about people. And I'm going to continue to fight for people of Arizona as the next Secretary of State. Thank you so much for having me.
First, I want to thank our Representative Delson for being here today and for supporting my candidacy. I'm glad to have you on my team. I also want to make sure that I acknowledge all of the folks out here who do the door knocking in the heat, who make sure that you do the phoning, the texting, do the postcards, and cut those checks no matter how big and how small to your favorite Democrats. We're at a turning point in this country. I mean, we can't risk not getting elected in the fall. We cannot risk putting up candidates who cannot communicate with all of our voters. We cannot risk having candidates who don't have practical experience, who actually know how these systems work, who have operated the budgets inside of these systems, not just from being shut out of budget negotiations at the legislature, but actually getting the budgets done and administering those budgets day in and day out for years over the course of dozens of elections. We need to make sure that we've got pragmatic problem solvers in this race in November who Republicans know they can work with. Neither one of us is going to get the Trump Republicans. We know that. But I can tell you right now, there are plenty of those Goldwater McCain Republicans who know me, who've worked with me, and who will end up supporting my candidacy. Moreover, I even fought against my own Democratic Party to get independent voters to vote in the presidential preference election in 2020 because it was the right thing to do. We have to have the right kind of experience and electability statewide if we're going to win in November. My name is Adrian Fontes, and I really appreciate your support. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming. We're going to have another discussion for democracy sponsored by the Pima County Democrats. And don't we have fabulous candidates?
This has been a presentation of the Pima County Democratic Party in the Discussion for Democracy series. These forums give Democrats running for statewide and federal office the chance to answer questions based on issues that matter the most to their constituents here in Pima County. This is Larry Bodine, and thank you for listening.